Hi, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Lana, and in today's video, we will be reviewing Varina by Charles Frazier. I jumped right into that, didn't I? I'm proud of myself. No rambling. Um, if you have been watching my videos for the past year, every now and then I will talk about this book called Cold Mountain by Charles Frazier, and it's one of my favorite novels ever. And so since what I'm trying to say, that was his debut novel. And so, he's still releasing novels. I believe he has 3 that were published after Cold Mountain. And another one is coming out in 2023, or this year. So I have had Varina on my shelves for probably 3 years, 3 to 4 years. 3 years as the time I read this book. And so I was just waiting for the urge to hit me to read it. Because Charles Frazier is such a gifted and talented writer, and Cold Mountain is just so stellar. It's one of those books that I think almost everybody should read. It's that good. I went into Varina quite hopeful. Alas, I'm going to go ahead on and say, this is not Frazier's best. But depending on if certain themes appeal to you, I think it's still worth a read, depending on what type of reader you are. I will go ahead on and now jump into the review. And hopefully, as certain things come up that I discuss, either it will, and then when I wrap it up and when I argue why this isn't his best book, especially coming after Cold Mountain. It wasn't immediately published after Cold Mountain. There are 2 novels before Cold Mountain in this book, but this book was a letdown compared to Cold Mountain. But some people still really like this book. I'm just not one of them. Head full of sorrows, heart full of dreams. How to maintain the latter as life progresses. How not to let the first cancel the second. So Varina by Charles Frazier is a historical fiction novel, which Charles Frazier mainly, I think he only writes historical fiction, or he only has historical fiction published at this point. Focuses on Varina, who is our main character. She's also mainly called V in this book. She is the wife of Jefferson Davis, who was the president of the Confederacy during the American Civil War. As the Confederacy falls, Varina and her family are on the run because they are now considered fugitives to the Union. The novel bounces back and forth between various years and locations as V recounts her life and remembers her husband, and she's also trying to process and grapple with the aftermath of being on the wrong side / the losing side of history. The premise is fantastic, especially as a person who, for me, studied the American Civil War in great detail at the university level. So I was super excited about this book. Varina is a novel, again, that spends a great deal of time, the whole time, really discussing how history is shaped. History is shaped by those on the winning side. That is Frazier's point here. As those who win get a louder megaphone to tell their side of the story, people also tend to focus on the details on both sides, the winning and the losing side. They focus on the details that make them look the most favorable. And over time, those details and biases are what become ingrained in history in a society as being fact. Also, the losing side hones in on certain details that soften the blow, that placate what it is that they're feeling internally. However, many of these accounts on both ends are just not accurate. Since then, South and North have been busy constructing new memories and new histories, fictions fighting to become facts. Everyone seemed to be inventing their own history and finding a publisher. Whatever crazy thing people want to believe, that's what they call it. Fact. I mean, this was published in, I think that was a Blue Jay, right back at you. we live in a world now over the past 2-3 years at this point. Fact check, fact checkers, fact this. Well, whose facts are they? It depends on what side you're talking about. It depends on the perspective of the person. So from that point of view, post 2020, this book is very relevant with this point that Frazier has, his point of view. And this was published in 2018. So if you are at all fascinated with that, post 2020, this may be a book that you want to pick up just for that idea alone and how Frazier expresses it. So this book is very timely. History and memory are bedfellows, and over time, even one's memory starts to grow vague, and the stories of what happened grow dim and less certain. So in this book, we have characters, specifically V, who is processing memory and how that memory has been manipulated while actively manipulating one's own memory in a way to just make sense of the way that things have turned out. And again, trying to placate and soften one's own guilt. But the pictures in my mind are so vague. I think I'm making them up. And also, this attests to just how memory is in general. Over the years, things become more vague, more lucid. And so how do we know what's being remembered and being recorded is even accurate? We don't. And we haven't gotten to the joys of revising yet, which, unlike life, allows you to go back and rethink and make yourself better than you really are. Even if the work comes to nothing, he referring to Jefferson Davis, will have these days to shape the past, make sense of how the runes fell against him. So as I've said before, I said at the beginning of this video, I studied the American Civil War at the university level. I was a history major. And so you actually see this a lot in primary sources, especially from post-Confederate resources. And my Civil War professor at the university I went to, what was his name? He has a title. He is considered one of the prolific historians on the American Civil War period. He is considered, what does my dad call him? The Prince of the Civil War, something like that. And so how I was taught with the American Civil War at the level, it's how he taught it. The argument that the Confederacy was doomed to lose, this inevitability of their loss, he was like, that's not true. However, when you look at post-Confederate resources and even Northern resources post the Civil War, it makes it seem, this Blue Jay is hollering, it makes it seem as if it was just inevitable that the Confederacy, the South, was going to lose, which I just finished War and Peace, and Tolstoy argues the exact opposite, like things are just inevitable. But when you look at it, a lot of times people are writing sources in a way to make it seem like this was a lost cause, so how much can we really be blamed for certain things, right? It's a way to soften that blow. A Union win wasn't inevitable. When you look at the sources during the Civil War, if you track the military campaigns throughout the duration of the war, the Union struggled a lot. They struggled for the majority of the war. If you look at their tactics, it wasn't until they got Grant in there. It was like, I'm just gonna go in there and start burning ish up. He was ruthless. He was like, I'm gonna make their lives so miserable. They're gonna have to give in. In the destruction of the Confederacy, of the Confederate States, the South was so bad. It was so devastating post-war that it was one of the only ways for the contemporaries of the Southerners of that time to be able to process what happened. We are so removed from the Civil War at this point, as far as, the actual warfare of it, that we cannot conceive of just how bad it was. And so you see a lot of Confederate sources, post-Confederate sources, trying to soften this. It was just very traumatic. War, just in general, is just horrible for both sides. You see this when I haven't read Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind is a book I really want to read for this purpose, because, side note, I feel like I'm going on some tangents, but I think it's relevant. My professor, for Civil War, he thinks that you should read Gone with the Wind. I know that Gone with the Wind has gone through these periods of being canceled. Because let's be real, the book is racist. It is. Her tone is it's not okay. However, you have to study these people if you really want to understand certain people in periods of time. Also, my professor argued that Gone with the Wind is relevant because it shows how the South was trying to process what happened to them. You saw this romanticization of the Confederacy, of slavery, partially because they were so utterly destroyed. They had to start from nothing again. So, yes. Let me move on. I'm 11 minutes in. Okay, so yes, we have this idea that this loss of the Confederacy was inevitable. It wasn't. Another idea that Frazier tackles in Varina is just how society also tries to justify these moral and ethical failings, such as slavery. We've been doing that sort of thing to each other all through history. Back past the pyramids, humans are inhumane, whether it's by direct action or by acceptance of a horrible action as normal. Here is actually a book that made me want to throw the book, yell, preach, okay, amen, hallelujah, run around the block 3 times and do a Pentecostal church stomp. Because Frazier is spot on. And again, it's this idea of how do people try to justify these failings, these moral and ethical failings in hindsight. And again, post 2020, this book, and we're still dealing with this. I think that we're going to be talking about the past couple of years for a long time, processing certain things, and I don't think history overall will be kind. Side note, mark my words, there are things that were done in 2020 and post 2020 that people are gonna be like, what were you thinking? You didn't what the stuff? Mark my words. There are certain things that people said was okay, and they're probably going to be considered human rights violations. I'm claiming it. Like it's shady. You can't tell me this stuff wasn't shady. And so Frazier's also saying, "Oh, we didn't know. How would we know? You knew. You just tried to placate your feelings." And this is what Frazier says: choices of convenience and conviction, choices coincident with the people they live among, following the general culture, never acknowledging that the general culture is often stupid or evil and would vote out God in favor of the devil if he fed them their hate and fear in a way that made them feel righteous. Impeccable quote. Impeccable. I'm going to leave it at that. There's a bird. I live in an area that has tons of birds. Okay. And they're sassy. So from here, again, Frazier is using Varina V to show how those who are on the wrong side of history have to cope with this reality. Being on the wrong side of history carries consequences. V lives with that truth every day. If you've done terrible things, lived a terrible way, profited from the pain in the space of history's power to judge, then guilt and loss accrue. Redemption becomes an abstract idea receding before you. Even in your sin, like dirt farmers in Sherman's path, have been simply to live in the wrong place you suffered. I said Grant earlier, Sherman and Grant. Ooh, they toe stuff up. Okay. Very real human bodies suffered the pain of theory gone bad. On that, Frazier nails it. He just knew how to say the thing, and he said the thing. Frazier, side note, again, I'm curious to know if I'm watching this blackbird. There's 2 of them climbing up the stairs in the back outside. Anyway, and I'm looking at their silhouettes in my window. His novel in 2023, he's a little preachy in this book, and I can't say I'm mad at it. So I'm curious. I would love to hear how Frazier thinks about the past 2 years. So you can probably tell, even by the quotes that I pull out, the themes that Frazier presents in this book. He is an excellent writer. I will never deny that. He is an excellent writer. You see it in Cold Mountain. He is just beyond talented. The themes, I think, in Varina are very important and they're very thought-provoking, especially to me as a person who was a history major and spent so much time studying the American Civil War. This is right up my alley. And this book is well written. However, like I said, it just wasn't a favorite for me. This book is boring. And it's a shame. Man, this book is boring. It seemed to drag. And if it wasn't for the impeccable themes and the great writing style, I would have DNF'd this book. That's how dull it was. The jumping back and forth between the various years and locations was also unnecessary. And in this particular book, it convoluted the story. This is a trend that we see a lot in historical fiction, with the authors jumping back and forth between time periods where you have the present or maybe the few, 1980, whatever, and they're going back to retelling these stories from the past and they're jumping back and forth between these two time periods. I think that's actually overdone at this point. There are times when it still works, but I've seen it so much in historical fiction, it's almost to this point where it's overdone and cliche. And I think maybe they do that to maybe spice things up a little bit, or to almost have this contemporary perspective on the past, again, trying to make sense of the past. But again, it's so overdone, and oftentimes, and with this book in particular, it convolutes the story. And in this book in particular, because there were so many, we were jumping time periods and locations. We go from the South to New York, to Europe. It was all over the place. I found it difficult to follow at times. Again, we have V recounting her life, and that's actually kind of realistic in a lot of ways. I think I know why Frazier did it. Sometimes when you're just telling a story organically, you bounce around a lot just in how conversation organically flows. However, in a book, it can be clunky. And honestly, this book would have been better if it had a more linear structure to it. Just follow V's life, and then at the end, wrap things up in the past wrap things up from her older self, now reflecting on these things, so that the reader doesn't get bounced around so much where you're just trying to figure out, where am I, who's speaking, what's happening. Sometimes, and I get that, I consider writers to be artists, especially the really good ones. Writing is an art form. And I get that when you make this your living, you're trying to keep things fresh. It also makes the creative mind is always looking for ways to tweak things and play around with things. And sometimes simple is still the best way, and this book suffered for it. This is not Frazier's best work. That is still Cold Mountain. Cold Mountain his debut was just phenomenal. However, I do think that there is still something to be gleaned from this book, if anything sounds intriguing about it to you. If you go through the reviews on the internet, whether that be on Goodreads, Amazon, whatever, you read people's various reviews on this book, it does vary. Some people were like me, they were like, this was just, he did too much here. He needed to kind of make it simpler and it was boring. Then other people liked it better than Cold Mountain. I think it's just, what's your flavor? Okay, what's your flavor? But I think that the topics here are very fascinating. And if you have a keen interest in the American Civil War, especially on the Confederate side of things, this may still appeal to you and you may really enjoy it. Also, I think that Frazier is just such a good writer. He's worth reading alone for his writing. I will still read the rest of his novels, and I will not get rid of this book. This is staying on my shelf, even though I gave it a 3 out of 5, because there are just some quotes that are worth reflecting on and going back to. Are you a fan of Charles Frazier? Have you read Cold Mountain in particular? Have you read this book? Are you interested in his work? I still recommend him as an author, but pick up Cold Mountain. Unless you have a specific interest in this book, I would say bypass it. Let me know your thoughts. Please feel free to leave me a comment, like, and subscribe. Feel free to follow me on Instagram. My link is down below, and I will see you in the next one.